Thanks for coming. This is the 39th annual Economic Roundtable. We have some pretty unique things to talk about. Before we get into that, I do want to just take a minute and recognize our moderator, who will be introduced formally, but Dr. Allison Sanchez is a faculty member of ours in economics, and Dr. Sanchez took on with some colleagues 2 years ago what we called our Diversity 2024 initiative. And that initiative completely flipped our faculty to be one of the more diverse faculty in a single year, thanks a lot to Allison's hard work. I say that because, from my perspective, innovation is driven by diversity, and unless we embrace diversity as a core tenet going forward, then we can forget about being innovative going forward. So that's what Allison did, and she will never say that, but I want to recognize it and acknowledge it, along with a number of peers. So with that, I'll bring up Jeff Light, the editor-in-chief of the San Diego Union Tribune, to kick things off. Jeff?
Thank you so much. Super glad to be here. This is one of my favorite events of the year for a couple of reasons. One, the idea of the economy. We're, as a company, very dependent on the strength of the local economy, like many business people who are watching today. So it's of high interest to me in that way, but also the audience for this event, right? This is a group of people who are interested in the pursuit of knowledge, in educating themselves, with curiosity about hard questions that you really have to think about, right? The economy, something that maybe nobody really understands. And yet it becomes a platform for a really earnest debate, which is what we're going to see today. People who disagree in certain ways, with different ways of looking at things. This is really our business at the Union Tribune. How the world will unfold here in San Diego, how we will all think about it, how we'll all engage with one another in that conversation. So all of those things are very important to me. I think they're very important broadly as we look at the trends in the information age, or the information dark age, or whichever way we're heading. Pretty big questions there. So it's important for all of us to celebrate the life of the mind. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce the other key partner in today's events, Shannon Moran, who is the acting CEO of the Workforce Partnership, if I have it right, or COO. There you go, both. Okay, so Shannon, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you, Jeff. I am Shannon Moran from San Diego Workforce Partnership. I want to spend a minute to thank our partners, University of San Diego. What a beautiful space. Thank you very much. And the county and San Diego Union Tribune for making this such a great event. It's really good to be here in person this year, and I know we're all excited to hear from our thought leadership and our experts to understand the local economy and how making investments in our community can have a really big impact. We are in a very challenging economy, and I'm sure they'll talk about this, with the looming recession, the R word. And we've got a lot of individuals in our communities that are living paycheck to paycheck. A lot of individuals are struggling to secure safe and affordable childcare. They have inadequate transportation, health care, and they're really struggling in their daily lives with all of these other challenges that they face, and it's hindering them in making decisions to improve their own family's economy and to take care of their family. In the face of all of these challenges, the San Diego Workforce Partnership, along with our 140 staff members, are squarely focused on our mission and are very committed in serving our communities in several ways through Through collaboration and our community partnerships and our business partners, we build programs that focus on demand and provide the skilled workforce needed for our employers in the region. By providing services to our job seekers that support their unique challenges and helping them to build social capital and preparing them for self-sustaining careers. And lastly, we continue to innovate as an organization to skill San Diegans up for in-demand jobs and help employers attract talent and keep workers engaged and contribute to the economy. We do this in several ways, focusing on data, on research, but mostly we do this by supporting our team members. They come to work every day with a passion to serve our communities, and we're very proud to work with them. We are mindful that workforce development is one small piece of this community's economy, and our organization will continue to serve all San Diegans, regardless of their backgrounds or income, and with a focus on supporting underrepresented populations. This conversation today is so important because we all need to pull together to serve all San Diegans and to help improve the economic mobility of all San Diegans. It's my pleasure to introduce our Chief Economist at San Diego Workforce Partnership, Daniel Ennemark.
Thanks, Shannon. So I will first start by bringing Ray Major to the stage. Ray Major is chief economist at Sandag, and he also has 20 other jobs. I threatened to introduce him as facilities manager, Ray Major, but he'll be talking about the economy and not about the rent that Sandag is paying. And then I'll speak briefly, and then we'll take a little bit of Q&A. So Ray, take it away. Thank you.
Do I have is this the popper? Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Welcome to 2023. And boy, last year was extremely interesting when it came to the economy. And I think that this year is going to be equally interesting. This presentation that I'm going to do is going to be a little bit different than the ones I usually do, because what I really wanted to focus on this year was the impact on citizens, on people who live in San Diego due to inflation and the interest rates that have occurred. So I asked my economics team, and they're back here, so Marcia Smith and Jeff Castanon, to put together information that really represented not just the overall economic things that are happening in San Diego, but like from a human perspective. And so that's what I'd like to kind of talk about today. So first of all, when we take a look at the San Diego economy, we see that inflation is still persisting, okay? This is like today's current, like how we ended 2022. San Diego inflation has dipped to about 6.7%. We have higher prices, and that's really raised the cost of living significantly for San Diego residents. And the Fed has started to hike interest rates in order to control that. And you see that, car loans, and you see mortgage rates, et cetera, going up. It's increasing the cost of borrowing. And there is still economic uncertainty, and that really deters consumer spending. When we take a look at diverse industries within San Diego, we see that our economic base is very well diversified. And so we have a lot of different sectors that have strength. And so this is a positive point for our economy, because as a recession on the horizon looms, San Diego's diversified economy will keep this region relatively, it's not going to happen too bad over here, okay? Innovation, military, healthcare have been stable, and strengthening tourism, on the other hand, has rebounded, but not really from an international and business perspective. Okay, the job market is tight. We have low unemployment. So these actually look like relatively good signs. The tourism, that's going to be a little bit of a problem next year. Housing and affordability is still a challenge. Rising mortgage interest rates, I think, is going to be one of the big stories that is going to continue to persist in 2023. Right now, only 16% of San Diegans can afford a median price home, and the median price home is $770,000 right now. This graph shows the regional labor market. So this is the employment and unemployment pre-COVID and post-COVID. And what you see over here is the green line which shows the civilian employment. The purple line is our civilian labor force. And you see that those lines are relatively close right now. The difference between those two lines really represents the unemployment rate, and that's what the orange lines represent. You see that we had a big fall in terms of the number of jobs that we had during the COVID recession. So you see jobs falling significantly. And you see that the labor force has fallen from about 1.6 million to 1.58 million, even though the employment has gone back up to the levels that they were at. And this is because there are some people who've fallen out of the labor force for a couple of reasons. There are people who have retired early and they didn't come back. There are people who still have childcare issues and the inability to take care of their kids, and so they're not able to come back to work full time. And then in addition to that, you also have some people who just for health reasons are not back in the workforce. So what we see is a shrinking civilian employment labor force compared to our employment. Sorry, I can't see the slides over here and I don't have my screen. So the San Diego regional employment by sector, when we take a look at what's happening here, we have a relatively diversified economy. And I think what this pie chart is trying to show is that there are lots of different sectors within the San Diego economy. And as we move forward through 2023, we have about 74% of our jobs are in employment is in recession-resistant sectors. Like, for instance, we don't believe that the military or government or innovation is really going to be hit that hard during an upcoming recession. However, about 26% of the jobs are in those sectors that are most likely to be impacted by a recession, and those are the ones that are in tourism and in retail and wholesale. And the reason for that is that this is really where you see discretionary spending. So 70% of the economy is driven by consumer spending, and it's spent on things like tourism and things like retail sales. And so we're not going to see as much of that as people pull back on their spending. Inflation is the big story, I think, of this particular year and also last year. This line here represents 2%, which is the Fed target for interest rates. This is where the Fed would like inflation to be. Target for inflation. This green line shows what the actual inflation rates have been going all the way back to 1970. And you see that it peaked in 78 at about 18.3%, right? And then you see that it's come down in the last decade after the Great Recession. You see that it was right around the 2% mark, and now it's back up to 8.3% in May of 2022, which was a 40-year high, and you've heard that in the news. The thing here is that the Fed has really one tool that they can use to try to slow the economy down, to bring down these inflation rates, and that is interest rates. And so this purple line shows what happens with the interest rates, the Fed funds, in order to manage the economy. And you see that, like, for instance, in June of 1991, the Fed under Paul Volcker raised the Fed fund rate to 19.1%. So mortgage interest rates at that time were in the 20 or 24% for mortgage interest rates if you wanted to purchase a house, and they came down after that. But you can see what happens is that the purple lines will peak when the green lines start to go up. So that's kind of what's happening here, is that the Fed sees inflation happening, they raise the interest rates, the economy cools down, and inflation comes back down. So I want to focus in on a couple of the time periods within the last 40 years so you can really take a look at what happened. And this is a period from 1982 to 2002, which is really a very normal period here in the San Diego economy. We had inflation that was around between 2% and 4%, and you had interest rates that were probably in the 5 to 6% rate for the Fed funds, and then so mortgages were anywhere from 12% to 10% during this time period. Okay, then that was an average mortgage rate. And what happened here is that if the inflation started to go up, the Fed would raise a little bit, and you can see how that created some of these recessions, which is in the gray bars. When we fast forward to 2008 through 2022, coming out of the Great Recession, the Fed lowered the rate to 0 because they were trying to kickstart the economy, and you see that it didn't really have any impact on inflation. And so at this point, you're able to borrow money as low as, for instance, 3.9%, right? So 4% mortgage rates. Even then, there was a real rate of interest that you were paying, right? Because you were borrowing money for 4%, inflation was 2%, so the real rate was about 2% that the bank was getting on your return. But look what happens as we move into the latter part, the last couple of years. Inflation started to pick up, the Fed fund rates were at 0. In January of 2021, we saw inflation starting to raise, and then what happened was the Fed said this is just transitory, right? And they didn't do anything, and you go all the way to January 2022, you see that inflation is now in the 8% range, and people are still paying mortgages in the 3 or 4% range, so what's happening now is that you're making money because of inflation, right? And so, in May, they started to raise interest rates, and you can see how the interest rates have risen over the time, and they're still lower right now than inflation. So the good news is that we hear every day that inflation is coming down, right? It's like it's moderating, but it's still at 6.7, 6.5%. That means that next year, everything's gonna still cost 6 or 7% more than it does today. So inflation has not gone away, but it's moderating. In order for the Fed to get that line back down to the 2%, which is their target, what's going to end up happening is they're going to have to continue to raise it, and I think that's what's going to happen in 2023. But what has really happened to the San Diegan, like the average person during this last couple of years since COVID has happened, we look at the cost of living before the pandemic, and the average family in San Diego with 2 children were earning a median income of about $92,700. Okay, and they spent it in these categories: utility and shelter, food, cars, gasoline, which is transportation, health care, taxes, and then they had discretionary spending of about $175 a month. And really, that's the money that you would spend to go, you know, if you want to take your kids to Disneyland, for instance, or you wanted to buy something that was, not that you could go for $175, right? See, So you would have to save lots of months' worth of discretionary spending to go to Disneyland. That's what happened. But take a look at what happened just in the last couple of years here, the last 30 months or so. The median household income is still at around $92,700, but now what we have is increase in shelter and utilities, and we have increase in food costs, increase in gas. So these are the categories that people really spend on, right? So when you look at the core rate of inflation, it doesn't include things like gasoline, it doesn't include things like food, but that's what we all spend. So when you take a look at this now, instead of saving $175 a month, people are now spending an additional $1,375 per month just to stay where they were to basically have these necessities. So when you look at housing, and food, you see that they're up by 42% over where they were the year before. And when we take a look at the debt, people are actually now losing $1,550 per month. They're spending more than they're making. So where is this money coming from is really the question, right? And what's happening is people are starting to put these costs on credit cards, okay, which is debt that is at an extremely high interest rate, and that's going to continue to erode the cost of living. So the CD prices have gone up in terms of the interest rates, right? So now you can actually start saving money. Remember, you put the money in the bank, and you used to have a 5% like passbook account. Do you remember that back in the olden days? For those people who remember that, well, the 1-year CDs are back up to 4.35%. This is great. If you had money to save, you could actually put money here. However, inflation is like 6.5%, 7%. So you're actually losing money by saving money. And if you're borrowing money, like these families now who have these $1,500 additional costs per month, they're either borrowing it on credit cards, okay? If they wanted to purchase a new house, their mortgage interest rates are much higher, car loans are up, as are student loans. And so the cost of borrowing money has gone much higher. This impacts the citizens. If you take a look at home prices, and this is extremely important from an economic perspective, because this is one of the biggest problems that we have in San Diego is affordable housing. But if you look at the average house here in March of 2020, the average cost was $599,000. Fixed rate loans were 3.45%. You needed, as a family, you needed $108,000 to qualify for a loan to be able to purchase that, and your monthly payments would have been about $2,700 a month, okay? Fast forward to December of 2022, which is just basically when we, like 2 years, right? We just come out of the pandemic. That same exact house now costs $770,000. The mortgage interest rate on it is 6.36%. Your minimum qualifying income is now almost $190,000. Your monthly payment for that is now $4,725 for the exact same house that 2 years ago you were paying $2,700 for. That's a 75% increase in the cost of living for somebody who wants to purchase a house right now. If mortgage interest rates continue to go up and we start to move into 7.5% or 8% mortgage, which was not uncommon for a lot of the time here in San Diego, you're looking at monthly payments of $5,400 a month for the average house in San Diego, which is double what it was just a couple of years ago. So this is going to be a big problem going forward as we go through this recession. Personal savings rates. So what has happened? When inflation began to go up, we saw that personal savings rates were as much as 20%. And that's because there was so much money coming in forms of stimulus that people were actually saving more money than they were spending. But then when inflation started to take hold, you see that the personal savings rate immediately goes down. The Fed starts to begin the rate hikes. And by November of 2022, our savings rate is now down to 2.4%. So again, long term, this is impacting people, right? Because if you're putting money away, that's for your retirement, your future, for the Disneyland trip that we're not going on anymore. And so the savings rate is extremely down. People are saving 90% less money now than they were just last year in January of 2021. So around 2 years ago. So this is going to have serious impacts going forward. When we take a look at U.S. credit cards and other revolving plans, okay, we're looking at borrowing now. This is the amount of borrowing that was on credit cards, so about $746 billion from a national perspective. By March, those numbers were up to 836. Okay, so this is just validating the fact that people are putting their charges now on credit cards and carrying a balance. And now, in November of 2022, that's up to $929 billion from a national perspective. So again, people are not able to change their behavior and cut back on goods that they're buying, because with food you can do some trade-offs, right? So instead of eating steak, you eat hamburger, for instance. And so there are ways to cut down, but we haven't been able to cut down to keep up with inflation. And so what ends up happening now is that we're putting that extra money or those extra charges on these credit cards that we're paying 19% interest on. And since we're not saving, we can't pay those credit cards off. And this debt is going to go forward for the next couple of years or foreseeable future. So what have some people done? Another economic impact is that people are taking on second jobs, right? So when inflation began to rise, we were looking at about 3.67 million people who had multiple jobs in San Diego. So they had a primary job, they worked a second job. You saw that start to jump as people can't make ends meet, and that continues to go up too. Okay, so interesting impact on the labor market where people are now having to work 2 jobs just to make ends meet. So nearly 750,000 more people have taken a second job in the United States. So turning it back down to the individual, if you were earning the median price or the median income here in San Diego, $92,700 right before COVID, and you took a look at what you would have to earn now to be able to just make ends meet, you're looking at needing about an 18% salary increase or $109,200. How many people here got an 18% increase last year? Okay, I mean, how many companies that you work for have even budgeted an 18% increase? The other problem is if we were giving 18% increases, we would start to see then wage-driven inflation happen, right? And so this is a real problem, because what has happened is this is where you see the standard of living and the cost essentially going down, right? So a person would have to have this much of an increase, 18%, in order to be exactly where they were prior to COVID. So 2023 predictions, there's some economic headways for consumers, and I think that's the big story for 2023. Inflation worries do not go away. I think that inflation is going to start to be moderated. You're going to see that because interest rates are going to continue to go up. Fed is looking at a soft landing. Hopefully they can do that. Mounting debt is going to be a big problem. People are going to wake up in a couple of years, like next year and the next year, and realize, wow, I've got credit card debt of $10,000, $15,000, and now how am I going to pay that off? That's going to be a problem. You're not going to be able to refinance your house and take a second trust deed because the mortgage rate will be higher than it is today, and so that's not going to be an option like it was in the past. And then there will be a lot more job insecurity. So you're getting to a place now where, Microsoft to McDonald's is starting to lay off people or starting to cut back on hiring. And so people are going to start to feel that because we're not going to be hiring as many people as we were in the past. There are a lot of macroeconomic headwinds, too, that we need to keep in account. Last year, the last fiscal budget, California had a $98 billion surplus. They didn't know what to do with the money. In 1 year now, we have a $22.5 billion state deficit. Okay, and this is because of lower wages, the stock market, people not earning as much money and paying taxes. So what ends up happening is the state has a budget deficit. So less subsidies will be coming from the state in terms of things like stimulus checks. I don't think you're going to see that anymore the way that we did during COVID. The national recession is a very real possibility, and I think that that we're not going to be hurt as much as the rest of the nation, but this is going to have to happen in order to slow the economy down so that we can hit that 2% goal in terms of inflation. And then there's also global unrest. The supply chain has been disrupted from COVID, but there's also the war in Ukraine, which has big impacts on food and grain and some very critical materials. This can get much worse too, depending upon what happens in the Ukraine. So what are my expectations for the San Diego economy in 2023? I think what we're seeing right now are early signs of an economic slowdown. We see that the unemployment is starting to rise nationally, so more people are being laid off than people are quitting. We see regionally that there are layoffs, but I think it's going to be small and in very specific sectors here in San Diego, and businesses are starting to scale back. The recession, possibly late 23, 24, early 24, the Fed is they're not as aggressive as they could be in trying to keep inflation coming down, and I think they're doing that on purpose to try to create this soft landing, and that might push it out a little bit. And then in terms of impact on the San Diego economy, I think the housing market's going to soften. People cannot afford to purchase houses that are $770,000. If mortgage interest rates are 8%, we have less than 10% of the people could even purchase that house if you put it on the market. Unemployment rates, I think you're going to see creeping up into the 4s. The stock market is going to be volatile, and I don't think that you're going to see huge returns there this year. Tourism is going to continue to struggle, especially when it comes to international tourism and business tourism. The first thing businesses cut back on are conferences. So, for instance, San Diego had a huge convention business prior to COVID. I don't see that coming back next year. And then commercial property development, I think you're going to see it start to stall. You see a lot of these high-tech places being put in around downtown. I'm not sure that they're going to be able to lease them as quickly because companies are going to kind of take a wait-and-see attitude to see what happens to the economy. And with that, that concludes my presentation, and I'll hand it back over.
Thanks, Ray. That was very informative, and we were promised by the UT. We were promised debate. I'm sorry to tell you, we're not going to deliver. Ray and I see the economy pretty eye to eye. I think I agree that tourism and retail are areas where we have to look out and see if those sectors thrive in the next year. I think it's not just susceptibility to recession. It's also the role of automation, and as Ray mentioned, businesses can cut back on business travel because Zoom exists, right? And so, those are two areas of the economy that are worth watching over the next year. I want to briefly kind of give a little bit of perspective. When we talk about the economy, often we talk about differences of 1 or 2%. GDP growth is going to be 2% higher than we thought. Wow, that's a big deal. And that over time variation is very important and has huge implications for all of us. But within any given moment, there are huge differences within our economy between different groups in the economy. So when we talk about the possibility of a recession, the most recent Fed projections from September 2022, their median projection between the Fed board members and bank presidents was that we would peak at about 4.4% unemployment. So first of all, it's just worth setting your expectations, right? We've all lived through the last 2 recessions, the last of which was the sharpest and shortest recession. And then the one before it was a massive, massive recession. And so when we think about recession, sometimes we think, oh my God, the world is going to come crashing down, the sky is falling. But what we're talking about is an unemployment rate that's still within the range of what many economists would consider kind of a natural rate of unemployment. And for context, what does 4.4% unemployment look like? Let's look at unemployment rates when you break down different groups within society. So you look at white, black, and Hispanic workers. Well, in many ways, people of color are living through a never-ending recession. And so when we talk about fear of recession and what are we going to do about it and the urgency to try to prevent a recession, it's important to realize that for many people, recession is a way of life. Recession is old hat. Recession is just part of what you deal with, is high unemployment. Right now, unemployment among black workers is 5.7%. So, what we're talking about is unemployment in the overall economy peaking at significantly lower than the current unemployment rate among black workers in the hottest labor market in recent memory. So, it's just very important for us to think about this when we talk about home ownership, right? 75% of white Americans own homes. Among black and Hispanic residents, it's dramatically, dramatically lower, right? In San Diego, income among a non-Hispanic white residents is dramatically higher than among every other group. And the problem with this is that, as Ray pointed out, it's very expensive to live in San Diego. So these are projections from the University of Washington of how much it costs to basically afford a low standard of living in San Diego County. Okay. In the blue, we're looking at the costs for a single adult with no dependents. And in the orange, we're looking at 2 adults with 2 kids of childcare age. So notice that in San Diego, the cost of childcare for a family of 4 is higher than rent, and we all know how expensive rent is. So if you are earning less, how are you going to meet these basic thresholds, right? When we take all those costs in the blue for a single adult earner and we add them up, it looks like we need a job that pays $20.82 an hour. And at San Diego Workforce Partnership, we call that a self-sufficiency wage. For a family of 4, both adults need to be making a job that pays $30 an hour. We call that a family-sustaining wage. Middle class wage is probably closer to $40, or, as Ray pointed out, soon it's going to be more like 50, right? So it's very expensive to live in San Diego, and the way that you can afford to live in San Diego is to get a high-paying job. And the problem with that is that in order to get a high-paying job, you have to invest in your human capital. You have to get education and training. And in order to afford education and training, you need wealth. And in America, the median white family has 10 times the wealth of the median black and Hispanic families. So how do you invest in your human capital when you don't have wealth to do it? We've got a long description of kind of like how we got here in San Diego at workforce.org/race. Is a 20-minute video to talk about how did we get here in San Diego. And the short answer is 400 years of racist public policy and private discrimination. But what are we going to do about it? Well, and where does it put us? This is a kind of a difficult to read chart, but I'm an economist, so whatever. You get what you pay for. So every bubble on this chart is an occupation. Okay, there's 1,000 occupations almost in San Diego. Every bubble is an occupation. The larger bubbles are occupations with more workers. The smaller bubbles are ones with less workers. And along the bottom here, I'm looking at the portion of workers who are Black, Hispanic, Native American, or multiracial. Okay, and it goes from 10% to 90%. And then on the y-axis here, I've got median wage in that occupation. And it's a logarithmic scale, meaning that the difference between $10 and $20 is the same as the difference between 20 and 40, 40 and 80, et cetera, right? So it's not a linear scale, it's a logarithmic scale. And notice that there is almost a perfect line that shows that occupations that are the highest paying, $60 to $100 an hour, are on average around 20% BIPOC workers, okay? And occupations that are the lowest paying are 60 to 100%, right? So this is occupational segregation. That's what it looks like. How do you get out of that situation? You need to get people opportunities to upskill so that they can get higher paying jobs. That's what San Diego Workforce Partnership is all about. We can't do it alone, and the reason we can't do it alone is because it's not just the cost of the training. So you look at one of the best deals in San Diego. If I had a nephew or a niece who was about to graduate from high school and said, what should I do? I'd say, go to the community college, get a 2-year degree in dental to become a dental hygienist. For a total of $20,000 between the courses you'll take at Mesa and the supplies and the exams, licensure, you can be a licensed dental hygienist by the time you're 20 and be making 6 figures with almost no student debt. It's an incredible deal. I mean, compare that to you go to a 4-year bachelor's program and then 2 years of master's degree and then, got a mountain of student debt. It's an incredible deal. But the opportunity cost of that training is 3 times as much. So if you took the opportunity cost, meaning the cost of the lost wages, if you took just the time that Mesa estimates it will take, the number of hours exactly that it takes to get this degree, assuming you were able to fill in your extra hours with part-time work, right? Just losing out on the hours it takes to get that degree, if you were making $20 an hour, you'd lose $57,600 of wages, because you could have been earning wages during the time that it took you to get that degree. So when you talk about the cost of upskilling, it's not just the direct cost, it's also the opportunity cost. So what do we do about that? As a region, we have to come together to find a way to help people get the training that they need in order to get high-paying jobs, because in a world where we have continued high inflation and where the cost of living is just sky high, we have to do something structurally to create opportunity for people who don't have wealth because of the public policies that we adopted in San Diego and in the country that have prevented some families from building wealth. And when we talk about this problem, it's not just a problem for a special few, right? It's not just, oh, the economy works for most people, but it doesn't work for a small number of people. Well, it's a minority of people who are non-Hispanic white in San Diego County. You'll notice this adds up to a little more than 100%. That's because, when you talk about people who are multiracial, there are people who add up in multiple categories. But the point is that 45% of San Diegans are non-Hispanic white, and half of those people are white dudes like me, and the economy's working great for us. But it's not working for a lot of people. With that, very joyful, jolly presentation that I just gave you, I'm going to introduce some people who have some ideas about what we can do about the challenges that we face in San Diego County. I'm going to introduce Allison Sanchez, who's a professor of economics at USD, whose dean told me to introduce her as an economic goddess, I think was the term that he used. But we'll stick with professor of economics. Laura Cohn is senior director of childcare and education, of care and education. Okay, at Mission Driven Finance, Kwafi Reed, who's the president and CEO of San Diego Habitat for Humanity, and Eduardo Velasquez, who's senior director of research and economic development at the regional EDC.
Hello? Okay. I have a PhD, but I can't figure out how to turn on the microphone. All right, so now that we've all been thoroughly depressed by all of the joyful statistics that were on those slides, and congratulations and kudos to Daniel for showing a graph that was in log form. Shout out to you. All right, so now let's get ready to hear some solutions. So I'm really excited today, and I'm actually going to start with Kwafi because we were talking about housing. And then we're going to talk about affordable childcare because apparently that's even worse than housing now. And then we're going to sum it all up with Eduardo, and hopefully we'll have a conversation that'll be interesting for all of you folks. So, Kwafi, what can we do? We've heard a lot about affordable housing. We've heard a lot in San Diego recently about homelessness. Housing for people who are housed at the moment is expensive. What can we do?
So first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for starting me off with a super easy question. Appreciate that. I think that as a body politic, what we need to do is a few things. The first thing I think that we're going to have to do is to have a bit of patience. There is an increasing understanding, and I'm just going to steal the title from a recent book, that homelessness is a housing problem. And that realization, while it sounds very simple, has taken a while for us all, I think, to sort of accept. But implied within that solution are a few realities that we as a community have to, I think, frankly, come to grips with. The first is that we have, as a society, as a region, underinvested in both housing as far as sort of our government expenditures, but also as a set of sort of policy priorities over a real sort of number of decades. We've made a series of choices that have resulted in a housing ecosystem that just doesn't work. And so it's going to take a while for that to be unspooled and redirected. And if you want a kind of simple way to think about it, any affordable housing development that we are working on now takes about 5 years from the moment it's sort of conceived of to the time it gets built. And yes, you can speed up permitting. Yes, you can speed up some of the entitlement processes. But even with the financing and the construction, it's still a 3 or 4 year process, just honestly. So when we look at kind of the landscape, we have to have some patience, and I think also, frankly, extend our policymakers some grace. It's going to take some time for this solution to start to look like it's getting sort of resolved. I'd say the other thing that we frankly have to do is to accept the fact that the simple solutions, anyone who says this is the one solution, this is the way it's going to work, is probably either selling something or has a vested interest in that outcome. There are a set of sort of structural things which you can do, but those things really revolve around regulatory fixes, increasing density, or some sort of subsidy program. Those are sort of your 3 big boxes. And when you start to look at those things, you really need a connection between the private sector and the public sector working together. The market will not solve this on its own, and the public sector cannot solve this on its own. Those 2 things, and I've worked in nonprofit housing and in the public sector in a few different regions, but we have to accept the fact that neither of those are going to be the only way that this is going to get done. I'll add one more thing. There's something that all of us here can do, really 2 things. The first thing is we can support investment in affordable housing solutions. There have been a series of recent studies that have started to quantify what the cost of sort of solving homelessness in the state would be. That's the good news. We know the number. The bad news is that the number is about $8 billion for the state. That's about 3% of the state's budget. That's a study that comes out from from the Corporation of Supportive Housing, and I believe it's Hilton. So those are sort of the kind of big line numbers. We have to support those investments. The other thing that we can do as a community is accept the fact that some other neighborhood is not going to solve affordable housing or homelessness for us. It's going to happen in your neighborhood. If you're concerned about homelessness, go to your community planning board and be that voice that speaks up for additional density, for additional housing, accepting the fact that if you want a place for your kids to live here, your neighborhood will likely have to look a bit different. So that would be where I would start.
Awesome, thank you. I just want to quickly follow up. What types of investments do you think would be necessary?
So I think there are a range of investments. Homelessness has been understood, and I think I fell into this trap as sort of being caused by what we now understand to really be sort of the acute externalities, sort of the symptoms, mental illness, substance abuse. Some of those issues were what we all sort of thought that homelessness kind of was. And we are going to have to make investments to sort of address those acute issues as they show up. But we're also going to have to walk and chew gum at the same time, which is to say that the long-term investments in public subsidy programs, but also in supporting the private sector as they make the not always economically attractive choice to either have to set aside affordable housing, and those can be things like inclusionary zoning or sort of like other kind of regulatory regimes. We have to support those investments that are going to push our public and private sector to really kind of work together to really kind of create those units that are going to provide that housing that we all see clearly doesn't exist in our market.
Thank you so much. Laura, I turn to you now. We don't often hear about childcare in the context of housing and homelessness, but there are intersections. Could you elaborate on those?
Yeah, so many intersections, and I'd love to talk about them. So let's just start with the area of homelessness itself. So there are homeless individuals, but there are also homeless families. And when a family is homeless, they need to get stabilized. They need to get more family income, and that's the way they'll get themselves into a more sustainable path. Well, if you have young children, in order to start earning money, you need childcare. And there are some public policy mechanisms for helping to ensure that homeless families have access to childcare, but it's not as direct and immediately available as we might hope that it would be. So absolutely assuring that every family that's experiencing homelessness has childcare, reliable, stable, therapeutic, trauma-informed childcare would be one way to alleviate or set the right pathway anyway for families that are experiencing homelessness. But housing and childcare also intersect because a significant portion of childcare, especially in San Diego County, actually we have an extra high dosage of family childcare. So licensed childcare by the state happens in commercial spaces. Those are childcare centers. But it also happens in people's homes where people have a small business that's in their home where they are licensed by the state to provide childcare for either 6 to 8 children, or 12 to 14 children. And in California, we have this actually really great law that says you can operate childcare by right in any residence, apartment, or house. Your landlord, in other words, can't tell you that you can't do that. Most states don't have that law, and that's one of the reasons why San Diego has a good amount of family childcare. But the family childcare providers who are operating in rented spaces, rented houses, are harassed by their landlords continuously. They have their leases ended on them. They have strange fees imposed on them. So they're very unstable, and they end up moving their businesses frequently. They're also really stressed and are providing less quality care because of the stressors of being renters. And so that's where I am right now at the Mission Driven Finance. We're creating a real estate investment trust for child care facilities. We'll invest both in commercial facilities and in residential facilities. And Congresswoman Jacobs secured a federal earmark for us to purchase houses for child care providers, renovate them to be ideal for child care, and then lease them to the providers as a child care friendly landlord who's stable, who wants them to run child care, who won't give them troubles for the parents dropping off kids or making noise when they're outside playing. And we want them to become asset owners as well. So if the property appreciates while they're leasing from us and they have the wherewithal to buy it from us someday, we'll share half of the appreciation profit with the child care provider to apply as a down payment or a price discount to help them buy the home. Oh, thank you. So yeah, we're aiming to launch that imminently, both here in San Diego, but also in Las Vegas, in Detroit, and with a Montessori child care provider around the nation. So that's one great solution. The last thing I'll quickly mention, because I think I've talked a while now, is affordable housing. So affordable housing developments include families. So when we're creating affordable housing, there are other jurisdictions around California who have decided they must include childcare. So because there are families there, they need childcare, and one of the points of affordable housing is for this discounted housing to stabilize the family, allow them to get to work. So as San Diego moves forward to really integrate into our thinking about affordable housing, that it always comes alongside childcare is another change that I think we're on the verge of making, and that will make a difference as well.
Thank you so much. I think that what we're hearing is that there's a lot of decisions that families have to make when they're thinking about a place to live, right? So imagine you're a family, you have a parent or two parents working, you have childcare to think about, you have what wage you're going to make, you have a decision to make about where you're going to get a job. Eduardo, how do we attract and retain diverse types of talent to San Diego? What kinds of problems are employers facing in attracting San Diego? So I know in San Diego we have the sunshine tax, I think they refer to it as. You know, it costs a lot to live here because it's such a beautiful place. But how are employers dealing with this?
Yeah, it's a great question. The talent attraction and retention question, I think, is the same question in many instances. And in the current environment, coming out of the height of the pandemic and the impact that had on how work is executed, and the advent or acceleration of remote work, it's a big challenge for San Diego. San Diego, as Ray pointed out, is one of the most expensive metros in the country now. It has been for some time. And so when you have the option to work from anywhere, and your dollar goes a lot further in a metro like Denver or Austin or Boise or even outside of the United States, that is a calculation that a lot of professionals are making, a lot of working families are making, and it's affecting local companies' ability to attract that talent that they need to grow. It's a very tight labor market, and that tightness is not unique to San Diego right now. Nationwide, we actually have the lowest ratio of talent supply to job openings that we've had in 15 years. So everyone around the country, if not globally, is competing for that same talent. The type of skills that employers want are kind of converging increasingly over time. And so the cost of living challenge is now often the most cited challenge that businesses bring, to us at least. That wasn't the case before the pandemic. There were a lot of companies that, while the cost of living was already relatively very high in San Diego 2-3 years ago, there were a lot of companies, large companies, well-paying companies that were not as concerned by that cost of living pressure because they felt that they could keep pace and keep up. That's no longer the case. We are seeing advertised salaries rise rapidly. So I actually think some of the inflation that we're seeing locally is already reflective of wage growth, necessary wage growth to keep pace. But that challenge will only get greater and more acute for companies across industry that are looking to fill positions at the moment. And pretty much everyone's hiring. So this looming recession that everyone likes to talk about is one that I'll candidly say I'm interpreting in a slightly different way. I don't think it'll be as severe, maybe in line with what the Federal Reserve is projecting from a job loss perspective, because the labor market is so tight today. However, the challenges are that there's a pretty strong misalignment between the labor supply in terms of those who are unemployed or looking for work and the types of jobs that are being advertised at a rapid clip. And so in terms of the investments that we need to make longer term, some of the things that Daniel hit on, and building those pathways to economic mobility, we do really need to invest on the long-term retraining and upskilling of our workforce here locally, because the types of jobs that we're looking to fill and the ones that are more resilient to economic shocks and that pay better salaries and give you a better chance to compete against the high cost of living in the region, those jobs tend to have high barriers to entry. I think we're seeing some companies wise up and get a little creative and aggressive about lowering those barriers to entry, maybe not requiring an advanced degree to do an entry-level engineering, software engineering position, for example, or not requiring a bachelor's degree in some instances to do some mechanical engineering type work. So we're seeing some companies adjust their requirements, not their expectations in terms of skills and capability, but the paper that comes associated with a moniker of possessing those skills. They're adjusting those requirements, getting people on board earlier, coming in at maybe a slightly lower pay because of those adjusted requirements, but they're training them in-house, building those capabilities in-house, and giving them a pathway to a long-standing career in San Diego. So I think the longer-term investment that we need to be making to keep our competitiveness really is bringing the many populations that we have in San Diego that are not accessing those jobs today, building those pathways so they can access them tomorrow.
Thank you. And how would we build those pathways? I hear a lot, I think we all hear a lot about we need more investments, we need more involvement at different state and local levels, but what would if you could pick one type of investment, one policy change, one regulation change, one piece of legislation, if I could put you on the spot and say, what would you choose? What would help us not solve the problem, but get close to it?
Yeah, I mean, in the immediate term, I think there is the emphasis should be on reevaluating requirements for new hires, and because that's what's going to get people in the door today. So that would be the short term, I think, solution, and maybe that doesn't require any change in legislation or policy, but rather sort of an introspection by hiring managers, and I think again the smarter companies are doing that. Longer term, it ties back into everything that Laura was discussing. It's having that quality childcare, available childcare for our youngest children, so that they're on a stronger and more prosperous path from day one or from age 2, whenever kids go into childcare, throughout the entire educational pipeline, so that the likelihood of success is that much stronger. And so I think those investments are critical for the long-term success of our workforce and the long-term success of our region.
All right, thank you. So I think we've seen that all of these issues are so tightly tied together. One of the things that I think about in retraining, I know I might retrain as a dental hygienist, but if someone is considering retraining, childcare is incredibly important to being able to go back to school and do something like that. So I think recently I had heard in the news that San Diego Unified School District Board President had said something about, and Laura, you can expand on this better than I can because it's something I heard in the news, about having the whole what was it? I'm going to say here, birth to 18 system being taken care of in the public school system. What are your thoughts on that? Would that help or would it hurt? I see you're smiling.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice if we could just wipe out the whole existing fragile childcare sector and have the school district take it over, was the proposal. The school board member was correct that the childcare sector, as we've allowed it to grow up as a cottage industry in the United States, is not strong, and it's going to require substantial investment in order to stabilize it. But I sit here rather skeptical of the school district being the right single solution for that. They just have added a new grade level, and that's a substantial new public investment in early childhood. But as parents of 4-year-olds are feeling acutely right now, it's only 3 to 5 or 6 hours a day for only 9-ish, 10-ish months a year. And for full-time working parents, that is not childcare, or at least it's childcare for 20 to 30 hours a week, which is great. Free childcare for 20 to 30 hours a week is better than having to pay for it for 40, but it's not a whole solution. And as a parent who did those gymnastics of filling in those after-school gaps and summer gaps, et cetera, for my kids once they hit school age, it's not the whole enchilada. And the irony for me was early in the pandemic, and we all said things that we maybe didn't mean or regret early in the pandemic, but when Superintendent Cindy Martin, when parents were complaining to her that having the schools closed meant they couldn't go to work and that was impacting their family income and was a huge burden on them, she responded, I like to think that it's emotional, and it was an emotional moment. She said, "The schools are not childcare." And yes, you are childcare. You are childcare. First, when you first have your kids enroll in kindergarten and you don't have to pay for that amount of childcare, you know that, that's for your family budget increases, and that's great free childcare. But I'd rather see us invest in the community-based childcare sector in a way that is just and provides for livable, thriving wages for our childcare providers, provides choices for parents, serves working parents and their needs, both sort of the 9 to 5 working parents, but also the parents who work off shifts and evenings. And I think we're a long way from the school districts having the capacity and commitment and wherewithal to do that for us. So let's invest in the system that is and make it what it should be.
How are we doing on time? We're doing okay? All right, great. I would like to ask each of you what the biggest misconception about your work is. Not maybe about what you do exactly, your job role, but the sector that you work in. So childcare, housing, local economy. What is the biggest misconception that you think maybe hinders your work? And how would you like to address that? I'll let anyone who wants to go first. I'm not gonna call on you. You're not students. I'll volunteer first.
I mean, there are many misconceptions about childcare, but I think the one that is most harmful is that it's babysitting. Childcare is early childhood education. It does take skills and commitment. It also takes love and care, for sure. That's a big part of quality care, but it's not just babysitting. And we've used this misconception of childcare in order to justify the extremely low wages that we allow in our society to pay childcare providers. Low quality childcare is actually harmful to children. So, and parents know this instinctually, but unfortunately the childcare sector it's so hard to find care that parents often don't get a choice. They don't get to choose between this care, that care, and decide which one's better quality. They just find the option that works for them. So we need to, Eduardo, you mentioned this earlier too, we need to invest in childcare, but we need to invest for quality in order to have the long-term positive impacts that we want to have for kids, and also to create the system that provides just wages for the workers.
I think the biggest misconception within affordable housing is that the sort of regulatory fixes and the subsidies and the efforts that are devoted towards increasing the supply of affordable housing are really only about targeting low and moderate income persons. Those may be the people, the population sets who are directly affected by those programs. But the ripple effects of not having a supply of affordable housing within your housing ecosystem affects everybody up the income ladder. And to the degree that affordable housing has felt or become unaffordable for us all is really us sort of acknowledging and feeling in this kind of this acute moment, the sort of aggregate effect of under-investing and not prioritizing those outcomes for those population sets. So our economy, as you will frequently hear, is all connected. And so if we do not make those investments for those people at those lower area median incomes, we are going to feel those effects. And so it isn't just about those populations, it's about all of us.
Well, so I don't work in the local economy any differently than you all do. So many of you may not be familiar with the organization I work for, the regional EDC. I guess one misconception is that we are a part of the government. We are not a part of the government. We're a privately funded nonprofit organization. Once you learn that, I think another misconception about the work that I do is that business interests are not aligned with the general population's economic interests. I would disagree with that. As a privately funded nonprofit, we have about 175 member investors in our organization that fund our entire team of 23 to provide services and support to small and medium-sized businesses that are trying to grow and expand within San Diego County free of charge to them. So that's permitting support, strategic partnerships, recruitment efforts, incentive consulting, and the like, all of which is free of charge to any business that walks through our digital doors or gives us a phone call or actually comes into our office. So I would say that's a misconception of the day-to-day of who we are as an organization. I think a broader misconception about maybe San Diego as a region, as a place to operate in as an economy, is that we're a smaller town, a smaller city than we really are. We're the 8th largest city in the country, and we're a leading region in the country in many important respects when we think about economic growth and innovation and technology in particular. Depending on who you ask, you can rank San Diego as either the top 2 or top 3 life sciences market in the world. And that's critical because a lot of the future economic growth and jobs will be tied to life sciences in one way or another. Life sciences are increasingly technology companies. Life sciences companies are increasingly technology companies. Life sciences is also healthcare. Healthcare is increasingly technology driven. So all of those industries and sectors are very intertwined and very connected and very fast growing and in demand and pay well. And a lot of that innovation, a lot of that growth is coming from within San Diego. And tied to all of that, something that I think is an even bigger and deeper misconception is that there's no manufacturing jobs. San Diego is actually one of the few regions that over the last 5 years has added manufacturing employment. The US has been shedding manufacturing jobs. You've probably heard that a lot. The state has been shedding manufacturing jobs. San Diego has been adding manufacturing jobs over the last 5 years, even during the pandemic where every sector shed employment, at least temporarily. Manufacturing continued to grow. It's growing a little bit slower in the last couple of years than it was pre-pandemic. But we are actually a hub of manufacturing as well. We produce a lot of high-value goods, medical devices, satellites for navigation technology. So this is a really innovative and important region from a global economic perspective. And there's a lot of opportunity tied to that growth. Not everyone has a direct access point to that growth currently, and that's I think where we need to spend some time and resources to broaden our economy and continue to remain as competitive and high growth region as we have been. And to that last point, I'll just push a little plug here for something that I think is not getting enough attention nationally or even especially locally, which is that there's $1 trillion that the federal government is currently getting ready to deploy around microchip processing, climate resiliency, energy transition and adaptation, and reshoring and rebuilding manufacturing capacity within the United States. There's a lot of motivations and reasonings behind all of this investment, but the dollars have not yet been deployed en masse. And we're expecting those application cycles to start very soon. You might have heard of the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. There's a lot of money tied to that and a lot of money that San Diego is well positioned to pursue. But I don't know that we're actually well aligned and well prepared to capture that funding in short order. And a lot of that money is for workforce development, retraining, and capacity building in manufacturing to deal with energy transition and climate adaptation and resiliency, and microchip processing, which everyone needs, just to find parking wherever you're going on a day-to-day basis. So I would put that in everyone's ear, that if you haven't been paying attention to those opportunities, please do pay attention to them, because the applications will begin soon, and that's a lot of money that could really propel and retrain and invest in the people that we need to be investing in to see the job growth that we want to see tomorrow.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We're doing okay on time? You want to take a few audience questions? Okay. A few audience questions. I see a hand here.
I have a question. Well, thank you all. I have a question in relation to the city planning to purchase residential property to help with the child care. How do you think that directly affects those that already live in San Diego that have already had competition, meaning affordability problems and inventory, and add the city as another element of competition?
I wish we could operate at a scale that we would impact the overall housing availability, because we need so much more childcare. We're actually we'll be a private real estate investment trust, so not the city, but we're receiving for San Diego operations and for Las Vegas operations some public support to help maximize the benefits for the childcare providers. So we expect with this first grant from the federal government and our investors that we'll be able to buy 10 to 14 homes in San Diego for child care providers, and I don't think we'll impact the supply terribly much with that, but we should make communities more attractive places to live, because there's a child care house in your neighborhood, a quality child care house where you'd be excited to enroll your kids.
If we're predicting a lack of use of commercial space, then why isn't the focus on residential and maximizing the commercial use?
Yeah, well, we expect to have a balanced portfolio, both commercial and residential. Parents like choices. Family child care is culturally sensitive, it's close to home, it has flexible hours. Center-based care is, can have more elaborate curricula, more highly trained teachers. Parents like to pick which one is best for their kid at a different age, and so the best child care ecosystem has a mix of both family child care and center-based child care. But we do see great opportunities in the commercial real estate market, given the shifts in work habits for more child care in commercial spaces.
Thank you. Other questions? I see Lauren.
We also are getting text questions.
Okay, thank you.
Every once in a while, just come back to me and I can ask those. But I have a combo question that a couple people asked it. What solutions might there be to enable home buyers in San Diego to compete with investment firms or others with greater wealth who might own multiple homes?
Ooh.
Kofi, I'll let you take that.
Another easy one. I would say, broadly speaking, there are sort of two approaches, neither one of which I think is going to be politically very palatable. One is, and you do see this to some degree in Europe, and I believe Australia and New Zealand have got some similar programs. You can set up alternative taxing regimes. Canada has recently looked at implementing a series of higher taxes on either second homes or homes that are not used as primary residences. That would potentially disincentivize the purchasing of second and third homes. The other pathway, frankly, is going to be some sort of public subsidy that homeowners can incorporate into their sort of their capital stack. And so we do have, and this is something I'm very familiar with at San Diego Habitat, a range of sort of down payment assistance programs. The challenge is that those programs, along with the deferred payment mortgage programs, have not kept up with the price of housing. If you have a $25,000 or $50,000 down payment assistance program, that is 10% perhaps of the cost of the house when the house was $500,000, but now that the house is $799,000, it just doesn't make the same kind of impact. So increasing the subsidies that are available, and these programs are typically repaid, they are typically self-sustaining, that capital does come back into the system, would be some of the kind of immediate avenues that we could take. And so those would be my two sort of first off solutions.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for one or two more questions. I want to get all the way in the back. This lady to the left, she had her hand up.
This question is for Mr. Velasquez. Can you go back to the $1 trillion microchip information again? Because I wanted to write down a little bit more what you said.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So the federal government has a few programs that are either already open or set to open. There's the CHIPS Act, which is for microchip processing and manufacturing. And that application process is supposed to be open in February. We don't know exactly when. So a lot of money there for building microchip processing and production capability in the United States. There's also the Inflation Reduction Act, which has a lot of funding attached to it that can actually be deployed for clean technology development and related technology development and workforce training associated with that. And there is, I always get the actual name mixed up, but it's the IIJA, the Investment in Infrastructure and Jobs Act, which also has funds that overlap in many respects as well. Combine these three big pieces of federal legislation and funding add up to over $1 trillion. Some of it is already allocated for very specific uses. Some of it has already been deployed to different communities across the country, but the overwhelming majority of that money has not yet been allocated or assigned or awarded in any fashion. A lot of it will be competitive in nature. We've been talking to our counterparts at the county, the city of San Diego, the state of California. In many instances, the federal government's looking for local investment or local commitment, state-level commitment to whatever investments you're trying to deploy within your region, so that the federal government's acting more as a matching funding contribution. And I'll admit and confess that I'm not an expert in any of these programs. A lot of the details have yet to be released by the federal government, but it is a massive opportunity, a generational opportunity, I think, to invest in the types of technologies and jobs that the world needs. And they're up for grabs, and the funds could really help transform San Diego and get people into the types of jobs that will survive the next economic downturn.
Okay, we have time for a really quick question. This gentleman has his hand raised.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Save. I'm from PCG, Public Policy Working Group. I just want to comment on what Eduardo said about hiring process requirements. I think that was a great comment, and this is a big responsibility on all employers to revisit that. So every time I'm hiring, for example, I say I'm hiring good people, not good resumes. People are willing to work hard and be positive and good addition to the team, rather than focusing on their qualifications and resumes. And the other question for you all about childcare. At BCG in our project, one of the main services we provide to our customers is childcare. And we know there's a shortage now in childcare providers in San Diego. In addition to the rate, it's expensive. So is your investment going to provide lower rate? Is that something they considered, or also wanted to know more about any long wait list? So if you could talk more about that, I appreciate it.
Yeah, there is a dramatic shortage of childcare in San Diego County. A study I did with the Workforce Partnership just prior to the pandemic estimated there were about 190,000 slots short. The Navy itself, I think, is looking for 5,000 or 6,000 slots in short order, desperately looking. So it's not surprising that parents of young children really struggle to find care for their kids. So for our effort, we are absolutely focused on making sure that every provider who moves into one of our properties is expanding their capacity when they do that, because expanding the availability of childcare is one of our principles. We can't, we're providing a real estate solve, but we're not adding more dollars to the system, that will allow the providers to charge lower fees to parents. That needs to come mainly from the federal government. Would also like to see employers get involved too, and I'll just end with one really cool policy solve that I hope will get enacted soon. So the federal government has a child care tax credit for corporations, and it's up to $150,000 a year, and it's so hard to use and so obscure that only 250 businesses in the whole United States use this child care tax credit every year. So dumb public policy. And there's a proposal that we're promoting and that has got bipartisan support to change it from a corporate tax credit to a payroll tax credit. And if we do that, then it'll open up that tax advantage for basically any and every, both nonprofit and for-profit corporation, and should increase the utilization, should dramatically increase the willingness of businesses to invest in childcare capacity in their communities, whether it's on site, which I think should be uncommon, but in their surrounding communities. That change in the federal tax law could have really enormous impacts on the dollars flowing into the system.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank each of our expert panelists for devoting their time to all of these issues. Thank you so much. And I'm going to hand it back over to Daniel.
I'll just invite briefly up to the stage to close us out, Deputy Director of Economic Development at the County of San Diego, Steve Lockett.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you again to our panel here. Let's give them all another hand. Fantastic information. Really showing how much that by working together, by talking together, by finding out what we're all working on, whether it's knowing the data, like the Workforce Board and SANDAG, whether it's working on housing, whether it's working on childcare, whether it's engaging with business and industry both here in the county and looking to move into the county, and also really looking to know, about what's coming up in terms of the funding that Eduardo mentioned from the federal government. As Daniel said, my name is Steve Lockett. I'm the new Deputy Director for Economic Development at the County of San Diego in our recently instituted Office of Economic Development and Government Affairs. Nice long title for the government. What we are trying to do in our department and for the county is really represent and show that the county is engaged in economic development at all levels. That we are here to partner with everybody here on stage, with all of you, to really make San Diego a county that is innovative, vibrant, and responsive to everybody. That we really work hard together to make sure that all San Diegans have the ability to find those careers, those job opportunities, those quality of life endeavors that really make this place, worth that sunshine tax that was alluded to earlier. One of the main things that I'll be working on and our office is working on is kind of mentioned up here, if you see SEDS, it's the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. This is a 5-year plan that the county has implemented and that has been recognized by the federal government as basically our strategy for the next 5 years. It was worked on by many people in this room, some people on this stage, and it allows us to tap into federal funding and other programs that we otherwise wouldn't be able to, both for ourselves and for our partners here in San Diego. There are 9 specific strategies that are laid out. I'm not going to describe them here because I'm the last person between you all on this beautiful day. And so if you'd like to, you can go to that website there to kind of read through the document, or you can reach out to me and my team anytime. But with that, the one last thing I just want to leave you with again before we all leave is we really need to work together. We need to know what we all are working on. We need to be able to have conversations like this where we have different groups here in San Diego coming together, conversing about opportunities, conversing about programs. Everything here is connected. Early child care assistance now leads to strong, vibrant workforce in the future. Knowing what opportunities, either from the federal or state or even local level, are coming up how we work together, prepare to embrace those opportunities and go after them. That's why we're all here today. That's why we're celebrating this 39th annual Economic Roundtable. And, you know, I just hope that as we move off today, move off into 2023, whatever comes from our economy this year, whether locally, nationally, or internationally, we all know that we're here together in a wonderful, beautiful place, and that we work together to make this a really strong, vibrant economy. So with that, thank you. Everyone have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next year.